Hi, I'm Pharaoh, and today I want to make a quick-ish video about the Steam controller. I was lucky enough to get hold of one. Here's my Steam controller, my lovely little device here. I'm quite pleased with it, and I'm going to show you some basic first impressions, but I'm also going to give you an idea of what I'm going to do with it on this channel, because one of the reasons I really wanted this controller is because I really like the way that No Man's Sky utilizes Steam input, and I like using it on my Steam Deck, and now I have the ability to use some of those features in the game on my PC. I'm really excited about that. I think it was well worth the investment to buy a controller like this for that particular use. But to really get the most out of it, I thought I'd also make some content that would actually show you how I'm using it and why I'm using it that way, and just a general overview in specific videos of how individual functions work in a particular game. So a worked example, as it were. Now I'm going to probably focus on a couple of games, more on that later. But that's the idea of this video. So let's start off by looking at the controller itself out of the box and my first impressions of it as a unit. So here we have the Steam controller as it comes in its box. Obviously not its shipping box, but it's box that we can keep it in. No, quite nicely snug in here. It's quite a nice place to keep it initially, but it's going to live on my desk pretty much. You can see I'm kind of slightly sideways. I'm not used to desk view, but here's the controller. I would say the actual construction is quite nice. A lot of people were saying that it's a bit cheap feeling, but I like this textured plastic feel. It feels good in my hands. It's got a feel of heft and grip to it. In general, I'm quite a fan of the way that Valve make their hardware, but I know it's not for everybody. My older controller, for instance, is much more a premium feel. Let me get my old controller. This is a PowerA Xbox controller. This is a Fusion Pro 3, which I've been enjoying using. It's, as you can see, it's also got buttons on the back. It's got trigger stops, which I never use. So I know this is something that the Steam controller lacks. I just never use them. I can see why, but I feel like Steam input and trigger stops are not quite compatible. I mean, they do work, but you have to program exactly where the trigger stops anyway. I guess some people might like it. I'm not a fan. There's sound on this one. There's no sound on this one. So again, I don't use this. I have a microphone that I use when I'm streaming that has my monitor in it, so I can hear myself if I need to. And this would just be delayed anyway, so I never ever use this. And this has got more buttons here, but to be honest, the big drawback of these kinds of kind of medium range premium controllers is that the buttons on the back are not really compatible with Steam input because they're programmable to a button on the front. So I would say, for instance, have this button set up for that button, the pressing the stick button. And the idea is that I wouldn't actually use my stick pressing all the time and it wouldn't wear as much. You can see a little bit of wear here. I'm going to try and replace this stick at some point. But I don't like overly wearing out the sticks, so I like to use the back buttons as sticks. And then I'll sometimes use these other two buttons in certain games, but it's limited. It has to match something else. And if you've already got a button for it, then why have a back button? Of course, Steam with Steam input is very different. I can program all of these four buttons as individual things that have nothing to do with what's on the front. And then, of course, Steam input for the trackpads and Steam input for the grip, which you can't see, but there's a capacitive grip here. Steam input for the capacitive sticks here. So I can do a double press instead of pressing down. It's just like a double touch, just tap, tap, instead of pressing it, which means that I don't have to, again, press in my control all the time. Although the pressing action here is a lot more smooth. It doesn't feel like it's going to damage the controller as much. In fact, I would say the pressing action in general is a big improvement on the Steam Deck, which always felt a little bit stiff to me. These feel quite easy to press, even when they're in directions. So yeah, I quite like the feel of those. D-pad feels very similar to my other D-pad. I'm not really going to moan about that. It's also a concave D-pad. Some people, again, would prefer a D-pad that's a little bit more directional. I quite like this kind of cross-concave feel. You can use the edges just as easily, and you can feel where you are without looking. So you can feel that you're on the edge quicker, at least in my mind. So yeah, the build feels nice. The quality feels nice. The puck, which is obviously the charger, it clips on, so you can't get it the wrong way, even though I just tried to. Both of these can connect to the USB cable. The USB cable, I'm not really a fan of. It's quite thin and flimsy, I think. I don't feel like this would last a super long time. I will probably be using this much thicker cable that came with my webcam, because I have got a couple of webcams and they've both got nice thick cables. One thing I have found is plugging in the puck can be a bit sensitive. It doesn't like certain hubs, and that includes hubs that are on your motherboard. And I don't know if this is something that they can fix, whether they've just kind of not quite implemented the full USB standard. I don't think it's anything to do with the power draw. It just feels like it's objecting to certain hubs. So all in all, I really like the build. I really like the feel. It's about the same weight as my previous Xbox controller. In fact, I would say that it's pretty much identical, feeling it right now in two hands. The size is, well, you can see my Xbox controller is a very comparable size. It's slightly narrower at the top, pretty much identical at the bottom in terms of its dimensions on the handles, on the grips. And in general, I feel like they've modeled it after Xbox, except of course we don't have these offset. Now, I've seen a few reviews, including the LTT review, suggesting that thumbs would clash. I would find it very hard for my thumb to clash on this controller. I'd have to be touching it here on my pad, like that. That isn't how I would ever use a controller. I like to use the tips of my thumbs. So that's going to depend on your hold. I have large size in terms of gloves. I wouldn't say my hands were exceptionally large, but it seems a bit odd that you'd have a clashing of thumbs. I would really have to force it to do that. Now, the thing that I really wanted to get this for was for its flexibility in Steam Input. You can use any old controller in Steam Input. So I could, for instance, use a button on the front to change the functionality of another button. So I could press that and change the functionality of these. But it's much nicer to be able to press one of these to change functionality, because it's a separate button, as I said before. And it's much nicer to maybe use grips, the grip sense. So I can just take my hand off, or I can flatten my hand. And as long as it's not wrapped round, it's not touching the capacitor here, then it will actually work as an input. And I don't have to worry about pressing a button. It can be an instant thing. So that's something I'm going to be playing with. So the whole point of buying a controller like this is for Steam Input. That's the main selling point, that it's the most compatible controller with Steam Input. And if you've ever played with a Steam Deck, then you would know that that's kind of the purpose of the thing. It's very flexible. In fact, so flexible that there's already stories of people being banned from some games because it's detecting as if they're using cheats. That's probably going to happen for a little while. I mean, people like EA are idiots when it comes to anti-cheat. That's my opinion. That flexibility is the whole point, really. I'm going to focus, at least today, on some very brief overview of No Man's Sky, because obviously this is primarily a No Man's Sky channel, but also I have a Alliance Peacefighter demo that I occasionally look at. I never actually bought Alliance Peacefighter. I wasn't 100% sold on it, and also it felt like it needed a better controller. Ta-da! So I might actually get around to buying that. But of course, as is often the case when you delay on a game, other games come along, and I might be looking at, is it Into the Black, I think it's called, which is also a space game with some realistic flight mechanics. And the reason why I'm going to choose those two games is primarily not just because they happen to be in my library, but because they indicate two different ways that games might actually have Steam compatibility. So if you play on PC Steam, you're probably familiar with the controller system. I've got this set up as a gyro experiment that I've been messing around with the grips, but we can select the official layouts for the No Man's Sky, and there's even an official layout for No Man's Sky Steam Deck with gyro support. They are big fans of Steam Input themselves, it seems. The reason I would say that is because they use a proper implementation of Steam Input. And the way you can tell is you've got these layers. And a layer allows the inputs to change depending on what's going on in the game. And these are automatic layers. So these are detecting what the game is doing and what you're doing in the game. And then it's changing the scheme for you as you're going along. So for instance, if we look along here, there's a number of on-foot layers, and these are all modifications of the on-foot. But then there's also flight controls, which is a separate action set. We'll go into what these mean at another time. And there's an exocraft action set and layers on top of that. And there's a galactic map action set and a photo mode. And so they clearly know what they're doing. And this is something we don't have the ability to do exactly the same. We can make layers, we can make action sets, but what we can't do is get it to automatically detect what's going on in the game. So these are kind of got an extra functionality that we don't usually see in all games. If we compare that to the contrast we're going to look at, this is the Alliance Peacefighter demo, and it's based on the gamepad, and I've created this layer because there's only a default layer which just has the basic keys, and then I've created an action layer for different targeting. And so that kind of thing is possible. And the way this would work, for instance, is while I'm holding down a particular button, in this case I'm holding down L4, which is one of the back buttons, then this becomes the active layer, and it has some extra keys. You can't see them all here, but it works on the D-pad and changes the D-pad functionality. So I press one of the buttons on the back of my controller, and then the D-pad has completely different targeting options. So if you're in Steam and you select No Man's Sky, you can immediately go to the controller scheme, which is what we were just looking at. So let's maximize that. And we can edit the layout, or we can view the layout. This is my initial layout that I have at the moment. As it says, it's a grip experiment, so it's not necessarily how I'm always going to have it. But the idea of this is when we're on foot, then it uses the gyro. My left hand is gripping the controller, and my right hand is just flat against the controller. So I'm kind of almost pointing with my hand as to where I want to look. Then I can turn gyro off just by re-gripping my hand. And as you can see here, it says hold to suppress gyro for the right grip. So in other words, while I'm gripping my hand, it stops gyro working. And the other thing I have set up on here is I've got keypad 4 on my left grip. Now I've keybound number 4 in the game to be my third person switch. So I can switch between first person and third person using my controller by manipulating my left grip. So as you see, that's on foot. And in menus, I haven't got gyro working. And that's the beauty of the way that Hello Games have set it up. They have got these different settings, and you can specify. Now, I haven't done anything with the Exocraft, for instance. So I've got nothing on gyro for Exocraft, but on flight controls, I have gyro as mouse, and I've got it on my right grip in the same way, and hold to suppress. And again, I've got it so that I can choose when I want to use gyro in my ship, as opposed to being all the time. And you can see on the top here, I haven't got anything for the other. I'm not switching between first and third person at the moment, and I could set that up really easily. Now, this is only really a quick introduction, but I just want to kind of show how this works. So what we do is we edit the layout. We can choose the different things. We need to make sure we're in the right action set, as it says up the top here. And we can use the mouse. I find it actually a little bit easier to just use the mouse to navigate around this. You can use the controller as well. Like this is clearly the left bumper, the right bumper. So the very first one that it keeps defaulting back to, sometimes I think as a bug, it seems to default back to it too often. I might have to put a report in. So now we're on foot, and then the next one would be the on foot layer for the quick menu while we're on foot, so that it changes the way that the left and right movement works. And then again, we have a base part editing one for just for editing bases, and one for placing. So they're two different aspects of the base building system. And you see, we can get pretty granular because of the way that Hello Games have set this up. Now, what I might do, for instance, is I might have certain commands on the quick menu, and I might set them up to a single press on the quick menu will go left, 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 up, left, and select, and I'd be able to choose extra options. That might be a little bit over the top. You'd have to put a lot of different things on one button, but you can do that. One of the beauties of Steam Controller is you can set things up to just trigger one and then another and then another, and it will have timings between them, and you can set the timings up, and it can be quite sophisticated, but it can be quite a lengthy process setting it up, but definitely worth experimenting with at some stage. What that also means is that when you're base building and you're placing parts, you can have a button that just does a glitch, like a wire glitch button, or you could have two buttons set up for putting something in cache and then using the wire glitch again for the universal adjacency glitch. And these are really, really handy for people that don't want to use timings like DDP or both together, and they have difficulty with doing timings, or the way they have their controller set up is like it's awkward to get the timing, like it's got a face button and also a trigger, and trigger timings are always tricky. So yeah, that can be set up in a different way by just pressing an individual button, maybe a back button while you're in build menu, and it will do the glitches for you. So I may experiment with doing that. If I get these things working, I will make specific videos on how they work and how I got them to work, because I see it as like a crossover between if you've got a Steam controller and also like No Man's Sky like I do. This is how I'm going to be using it. And I like worked examples online. I've seen an awful lot of videos on how to use the old Steam controller, how to use the Steam Deck Steam Input, how to use the new one even. So there's been a bit of content out there already, but they're usually not worked examples. And the ones I find most useful are worked examples. So this is how I achieved this specific thing, and this is the process I went through to do it. So I'll probably make a few of those videos because I find them most useful when I'm looking up how to do something. And I assume people similar to me will have similar idea about that. Just out of interest, I've got two different ways I can control this now, just the way it's been set up. So I can use the as mouse on the trackpad. So I'm using the trackpad as mouse, or I can use the controller as mouse. And this is quite useful for precision, because on a controller you're often kind of doing this when you're trying to, like, I might overshoot options and have to come back, And you get used to it, and you get used to your different distances, a bit like you get used to throwing your mouse around in some games. But it can be useful for precision. Let me just take the green screen away. Yep, that looks a bit better. Looks a bit more normal. So here we are in the game, and I'm switching between first and third person, as I said before. So I'm grip. And now it only takes a subtle grip change. So it can happen accidentally. So I'm going to have to set up the sensitivity. There have been a couple of problems with setting up sensitivity, which I'm not going to go into here. But as you can see, I'm switching by mistake because I'm not really paying attention. But if I'm holding my game and I'm actually focused on using the different buttons, then it doesn't happen. So switch views, switch view. The other reason I wanted to come into the game is I've also got a on-screen weapon controller. So you can see on the top left-hand corner, I'll probably zoom in when I'm editing. Now it might initially look like I'm switching different weapons in a particular multi-tool. That isn't what's happening here. Unfortunately, Hello Games haven't got individual keys for individual weapons. What this does is switches between my 3 most commonly chosen multi-tools. And obviously I can't really show you the multi-tools or the multi-tool functionality in the Anomaly. So let me go down to a planet and then I can give you a better idea how this works. I'm holding the trackpad on the left. So this trackpad here. And it's got haptic feedback so you can tell where you are. And I can choose between 3 different weapons that I've been hotkeyed. So I've got 1 on 7, 8 and 9. And to demonstrate that, one weapon, second weapon, third weapon. I'm just basically using a combination of the hotkeys in the game and Steam input. So if we were to just look at the settings here, I've hotkeyed swap multi-tool. I've got 1 on 9, 1 on 8 and 1 on 7. And in different saves, I would choose whichever multi-tools I think are most appropriate for that save. They're usually ones that I've got the weapons I prefer in. And I can switch between those 3 easily. I could, of course, put a number on all of them, but then I'd be wasting my numbers. So I've just got the 3. You'll probably notice that it isn't just those 3 weapons. I've also got change weapon mode in the middle. And that means that if I just hit the middle of the trackpad, I can change whichever weapon it is. So I've got the fishing rig. I've got to do the right one. Gravitano coil, neutron cannon, mining beam, terrain manipulator, etc. So I just have to make sure it hovers in the middle as opposed to around the outside. And then the bottom configuration here is switch alt weapon. So it will go from, I need to choose an actual weapon. So let's put it on the neutron cannon. If I go down, it was on personal force field and now it's on paralysis mortar. Cloaking device. It won't always show on the screen. Combat scope. Personal force field. So it's just the 4 on this one. And I can switch between them. I wish it would stay on the screen more consistently, but there you go. I'm switching between them. And I'm doing it very easily. I'm just doing 1, 2, 3, 4. Just swiping downwards. And I can swipe across for one control thing. Swipe up for the other. The middle is a little bit less intuitive, finding the middle. Some people put a little tiny bit of tape in the very middle of their trackpad, so they always know when they're touching the middle. You can also tell by just moving your thumb around and feeling the force feedback, but then you kind of have to move your thumb around, and really you just want to touch it. And I've got it on release, so I'm touching the pad to choose, and as soon as I take my finger off, it selects that option. which does mean I can't not do something. If I press it by mistake, I have to do something. But if I know which weapon I'm on, I can just choose that option, for instance. So if I know which weapon, I usually swipe to the right for my staff. That's my main weapon. Swipe to the left for my experimental, and swipe upwards for my mining specialist, in this case an Atlantid multi-tool. And obviously you could do it differently. You could have it anyway. And I'll show you how I set this up in a specific video about how that works. And then when I'm in my ship, it has a completely different functionality. Now it has previous target, next target, and closest target. And I can choose between those. And so I could just swipe across the top of my pad for next target, swipe across the other way for previous target, and swipe down for closest target. And again, I have that set up so that as soon as my finger goes onto the pad, it will bring up the menu. And as soon as my finger goes off the pad, it will select whichever one I'm left on. Something interesting, there have been on Steam controllers in the past a bit of an issue with the far right of the left pad and the far left of the right pad, supposedly to prevent hooking. But I'm not finding it on this controller. I certainly find it on my Steam Deck. And I think that was partly not to prevent hooking, but to prevent accidentally touching the screen, which can happen on some devices. But yeah, so if it is anything to do with hooking, then they've possibly eliminated it in software. I have no idea. Maybe they've eliminated accidental hooking of the finger across the edge. So yeah, those are the ways that I have been setting up the controller, and I'm still experimenting, and I will show you in individual videos exactly how I actually set those up so you can do something similar. And I will also share specific profiles on the Steam system so that you can load it as a community thing if you want. I'll call it Fair or something. I'll explain on the individual videos. But I'll be saving them so you can have a look at them, you can play with them, and you can decide if you like them or if you want to mess around with them. I'll probably call them experiments so that it's clear that they're not fully realized controller mechanisms. I'll use the default mechanism and just change one thing at a time. So for instance here, I've got the gyro, so it's moving around when I open my palm. And that just allows me to be a little bit more precise with my aiming. And I've also got on what I'm flying, my left capacitor, if I double tap it, that means just double touching it. So I haven't actually pressed anything, then it will scan. So I can zoom in on a planet. So I can say, okay, there's a planet there. I can be quite precise in my aiming. Double tap, and it will actually scan it for me. And that way, I don't have that thing where I'm kind of doing this. So the equivalent would be doing that, and then I'm kind of readjusting, and the ship is kind of drifting. Sometimes if it's very small or far away, you're having difficulty with a controller just hovering over the planet. So in this case, I can just do this, and I can be a little bit more precise with my movements. I could even make it so that there's a button that makes it even more precise, but I haven't got that far with this yet. So, a little bit rambly because this isn't a video showing you how to do these things. It's a video showing you my impressions of the Steam controller, which so far have been really excellent. I've really enjoyed using it. I've enjoyed playing with it. And the kind of videos that I will be making in order to demonstrate how the Steam controller works for me in very specific games as a worked example. If you're using it for other games, there may be some things that will be similar and some things that won't, but I find worked examples a lot more useful. But until then, I've been Pharaoh, travel well, and goodbye for now.